Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Kung Fu Killer, also known as Kung Fu Jungle, a Hong Kong action flick from 2014 that stars Donnie Yen. A martial arts expert and police self-defense instructor, played by Donnie Yen, is incarcerated for involuntary manslaughter following a fight with an opponent. 3 years later, a vicious killer emerges and starts killing retired martial arts masters that Donnie knows. With his own personal agenda, Donnie reveals that he knows the killer's next intended victims and offers to aid Inspector Luk, played by Charlie Yeung, in capturing the killer with his martial arts skills and knowledge. So this movie has a pretty strong opening. Donnie walks into a police station and he gives a disturbing confession that he murdered someone and he's all beat up. Then we cut to the present day, where Charlie Yeung is investigating a car crash where the man was murdered by brutal hand-to-hand combat, despite emptying an entire clip of bullets at the guy that was attacking him. But no one knows who this guy is yet, or exactly what his intent is. And even early on in the film, you know that we're dealing with a proficient bad guy who can throw down, And Donnie hears this news on the television in his prison, and he seems to know what's going on. But he's not being entirely forthcoming with authorities, despite reaching out to them to make a deal. So he's like, all right, I'll help you catch this guy, but you got to let me go. Give me a pardon. And that's your setup. Now, the strongest positive to Kung Fu Killer is that it's a briskly paced affair with a high number of fights. And the action is spaced out in similar intervals, like pretty even intervals, so you never have to wait that long for the next throwdown. Choreography, pretty fast, hard-hitting, mostly realistic, and you get a nice variety of styles here. Because one of the themes is that the villain is murdering martial arts experts, each of whom is proficient in a different style of fighting. And what he's doing, he's kind of like, he's trying to prove himself to be like a master of all trades, right? He could beat the best of the best at each style of fighting. And he has some other motivations as well. But that's kind of like the premise here, and that adds a lot of variety to the action. And it's always fun watching fight scenes involving people with different strengths and abilities. That contrast is fun to watch. There's some pretty good choreography here for sure. Like, for example, early on, one guy's got like a long steel bar, almost like a bow made of steel. And the other guy's just got a small knife. And it's like, man, this is a huge mismatch. But the way with the dude with the knife does some moves that were pretty interesting and I never really thought of before, in terms of being at that type of disadvantage in terms of weaponry. So there's stuff like that that's pretty interesting here. There's an early brawl involving Donnie that's actually kind of funny, because he beats up a bunch of dudes in his prison area just to get the attention of the guards. And then one highlight involves a woman who proactively goes after the bad guy to take him out. And she's armed with a sword. And she breaks out some pretty sweet moves. I actually really like that scene. And it's intercut with Donnie kind of fighting and running away from some of the cops who, they have their doubts about his motivations. They think he's playing them, and he kind of is. The lengthy finale, very impressive actually. Takes place in the middle of a busy street. It's got multiple stages, which is what we want from this type of film. Now, if I were to criticize certain aspects about the action, there are a handful of implausible moves and events that are peppered in at times, some of which involve wire work. Also, the very end to the last fight has some dodgy CGI effects. It only lasts a few seconds, but it was distracting when it showed up because it's pretty bad. But not a big deal, I guess. But overall, I think the action in this film does satisfy. Supporting actors are good. The bad guy is played by, pardon my poor attempt at this pronunciation, Bao Chang Wang. And he's been in a bunch of stuff over the years. The first time I really noticed him was in The Equation of Love and Death in 2008, which is a really good flick. He played like a small supporting character in that. But then he really jumped on my radar during 2014 when he showed up in A Touch of Sin, good movie, Iceman, not a good movie, and then Kung Fu Jungle. So that I remember I saw like all three of these movies within like a few months of each other, and the guy just kept showing up. So I'm like, man, he definitely got on my radar because just the frequency of the films he was in. And in a movie like this, Kung Fu Killer, which is also known as Kung Fu Jungle, you're facing off against Donnie. You got to keep up with him and move fast. And he is convincing in his fight scenes. He also has a look about him that's very like scrappy. Kind of like the opposite of someone like Donnie Yen, who can be very like suave. Wang, on the other hand, just looks like an everyday guy. And the first few times I saw him in movies, I thought he was maybe a little bit on the bland side. He doesn't have that like cinematic flair or like imposing charisma that's of somebody like Donnie Yen, who just kind of like owns the screen and sometimes chews the scenery. But over the years, I've grown to like this guy's performances more. And coming back to something like this, I can say that he does a good job. Always nice to see Charlie Yeung in movies. Very solid co-lead. She gets a lot to do because she's given the task of reining in Donnie's character and just kind of keeping track of him because they don't want him to get out of control when they basically released him from prison, right? And then Alex Fong and Louis Fan show up as well. They get limited screen time, but they're good in this. So, I know, with the recent release of John Wick 4 and everything, and in recent years, I know Donnie Yen's international fan base outside of Hong Kong continues to grow. So I expect some of his older filmography to get more attention in future years. And in my opinion, Kung Fu Killer, it's one of his more entertaining films from the 2010s. I think it is. It does what you got to do. Keep the pacing on point and give me some good fights. And you get that here. So I do recommend this. It's currently available streaming on Tubi, and it's also on physical media. And as always, we'll see you next time.